Soliloquy of the Spanish Cloister, as its title suggests, is a soliloquy that allows for a psychological insight into the character of the speaker in the manner of a dramatic monologue. In this case, the persona is that of an envious monk who spouts amusingly vicious comments about his fellow monk, Brother Lawrence. Browning uses humour to portray the furious irritation of the speaker at the apparently spotless character of Brother Lawrence, onto whom he is clearly projecting his own sins. He also conveys the darker irony of a monk violating every important Christian principle, while twisting the language and ritual of religion to justify his own hatred. The setting of the poem in a monastery creates an atmosphere of claustrophobia, which heightens the sense of the speaker's loathing of his rival and underlines the sacrilegious nature of his musings. However, the comical nature of much of his criticisms of his fellow monk have the effect of portraying the speaker as more of a grumbling malcontent with anger issues rather than as a serious villain. The ridiculous nature of the speaker's malice towards Brother Lawrence is manifest in the first word of the poem, grrr, as the obsessed monk utters an animal-like noise which conveys his visceral dislike, but also his childish and unsophisticated yielding to the base instinct of envy. Part of the potent humour of this character is no doubt that it speaks the primitive impulses in all of us that may tempt us at times to growl under our breath as the speaker does, but that after centuries of civilizing influences we automatically suppress. The fact that much of this tendency to reject petty hatred in favour of loving our neighbour is based on the tenets of Christianity adds a further layer of drollery given the speaker's situation. The coupling of terms of vehement hatred with the language of gardening, your damned flower pots, has a ludicrous quality. The impious use of the word damned next to the very innocent-sounding flower pots suggests that the speaker is consumed with an unreasonable malevolence that renders him ridiculous, since it is difficult to take someone seriously who is embittered about his fellow monk's horticultural achievements. The reckless intensity of his entirely unchristian hatred, "If hate killed men, Brother Lawrence, God's blood would not mine kill you," is doubly ironic given his reference to God's blood. This is what he is supposed to take as a sacred rite during communion, and his use of it as a blasphemous oath is almost comical in its blundering hypocrisy. The conversational tone, "What, your myrtle bush wants trimming?" portrays a man so obsessed with his dislike of his fellow monk that he addresses him in his thoughts as though he is talking to him, and the liberal use of exclamation and question marks in the first stanza and elsewhere in the poem suggests the exaggerated vehemence of his feelings. The speaker's mockery of Brother Lawrence's boring small talk with the other monks, and the implied pretentiousness of his use of classical phrases and terms, "Salve tibi, I must hear wise talk of the kind of weather, sort of season, time of year," is no doubt unkind in its sarcasm. However, the sing-song rhythm and snatches of phrases and conversation so aptly reflect the tedium of the daily routine that the reader may harbour some sympathy for the uncharitable frustration that is being expressed by the wayward monk. The speaker's puerile exclamation of "phew" and the use of the pronoun "we" to refer to Brother Lawrence as he describes what appears to be his rather precious self-regard reveal an immature, sneering attitude that is simultaneously funny in the juvenile pleasure he takes in pricking the pride of the other monk, particularly when focused once again on his gardening failures. He, there his lily snaps. By the fourth stanza, he has worked himself into a state of outrage about what he believes to be Brother Lawrence's fake piety, so that he exclaims, "Saint, forsooth," in an outburst of sarcastic repudiation of such an idea, and goes on to detail supposed evidence of Lawrence's secret sinfulness that instead exposes his own lascivious desires. As he attempts to suggest that Brother Lawrence looks lustfully at a couple of local women, his dwelling on the central details of their hair, blue-black, lustrous, thick like horsehairs, rather betray his own un-monk-like interest in their appearance. And the final line of the stanza, that is, if he'd let it show, bracketed as if to underplay the admission that Lawrence gives no improper attention to the women, makes it plain to the reader that he is projecting his own passions onto him. His ludicrous attempt in the next stanza to prove he is holier than Brother Lawrence, in itself an impious endeavour, by citing the ridiculous, empty gestures he makes, such as drinking his orange juice in 3 gulps, supposedly to honour the Trinity, is comical in revealing his hopeless lack of understanding of what is important in Christianity, as he trivializes core aspects of its doctrine. The chatty style of the internal dialogue that Browning employs allows the speaker to go from one gripe to the next in a continuous grumbling that evokes a character eaten up with jealousy. Thus, the opening phrase of the 6th stanza, "Oh, those melons," with its casual, questioning tone, gives the impression that another reason for his envious dislike of Brother Lawrence has just come to mind from his vast store of grudges. The scornful effect of the plural pronoun in the phrase, "we're to have," along with the 2 exclamation marks on the second line of the stanza, is further strengthened by the mocking language of "feast" and "so nice." This conveys the speaker's aggravation at Brother Lawrence's generosity and the fact that he is expected to be grateful. The 4th line, "all of us eager to get a slice," portrays the speaker's resentment at the fact that Brother Lawrence is in the position of benefactor, while he and the other monks are supplicants, portrayed in the word eager and the fact they only get a small portion. There is a shift in tone in the second half of the stanza, with a series of 3 questions, as the speaker continues his quest from the first half of the poem to ruin Brother Lawrence's horticultural ambitions. "How go on your flowers?" etc. The malicious pleasure he takes in this imagined conversation, where he tries to elicit disappointment in Brother Lawrence for the failures of his plants, is ludicrous in its pettiness, and his furtive sabotage of the blooms, with its cartoonish aspect lent by the exclamation marks, gives the impression of childish spite. Browning suggests that the speaker's envy of Brother Lawrence stems from the superiority of his moral character, and thus his vexation makes him fantasize about projecting his own sins onto him. In the 8th stanza, he dreams of tempting him by means of "my scrofulous French novel," and the sordid and demeaning language he uses, grovel, hand and foot, illustrates his desperate desire to bring him down to his level. Yet the impression of petty griping rather than true evil persists, due to the continued motif of gardening, with the humorous image of the speaker sneaking a copy of the pornographic novel into his basket as the unsuspecting Brother Lawrence gathers his greengages, the alliteration of the phrase adding to the slightly farcical image. Indeed, the pinnacle of his venom, as revealed in the final stanza, seems to be the blasting of "that rose acacia we're so proud of," his vindictive jealousy apparently focusing on the ruination of his flowering plants. The "grr, you swine" that ends the poem, and which echoes the beginning of the poem with its puerile animalistic associations, implies this empty, irritated growling is what he always returns to after his exaggerated fantasies of villainy. However, there are also darker hints of the twisting of religious principles that are deeply ironic in the setting of a monastery. The first 3 lines of the 7th stanza, "There's a great text in Galatians, once you trip on it entails 29 distinct damnations," represent an egregious violation of all a monk is supposed to stand for. Browning's rhyming of Galatians with damnations stresses the fact that the speaker is perverting sacred biblical text for satanic purposes. There is a grim humour in the fact that the speaker is apparently unaware of the core ideas of Christianity, and that, in attempting to send Brother Lawrence to hell, he is likely to send himself there. This inversion of his intention is suggested by the symmetry of the word trip, to apply to both the speaker's discovery of the curses and his fantasy of damning his fellow monk, implying that he may be foiled by his own devilish trickery. This preposterous combination of malevolence and foolishness in the speaker is displayed in the short phrase that begins the final stanza, "Or there's Satan," referring to the incarnation of evil in a similarly casual way to which he recalled those melons. The offhand "or" and the melodramatic exclamation mark suggest the tone of a bungling conspirator rather than a seriously evil villain, although the thought to pledge one's soul to him combines the risk of absolute perdition with a cavalier scheming, one might venture, that is disturbing in the levity with which he is willing to gamble his eternal future. Indeed, he is deluded enough to think he could trick not only Satan but also God, and save his soul by sleight of hand, a flaw in the indenture. This may be a comment by Browning on the corruption of the Church, which at times seemed to believe it could hide a multitude of sins beneath a pious exterior. The corrosive quality of envy is conveyed by the juxtaposition of the worst defilement of soul a Christian could commit, with his obsession with ruining Brother Lawrence's blooms, as he imagines the rose acacia past reprieve. The language here is ironic, since, while he is plotting horticultural devastation, he seems to be getting dangerously close to being a past reprieve himself in his flirtation with Satan. This sense of his dalliance with the devil is strengthened by the occult-sounding chant, High Zai Hein, and by his garbled prayers. The trochaic tetrameter, which contributes to the aggressive tone of the poem, and the regularity of the A-B-A-B-C-D-C-D rhyme scheme, are perhaps a reflection of the speaker's relentlessly hateful obsession with Brother Lawrence, to the extent that he barely pauses to consider the hell he is in danger of descending into.